Navigator, estimated time of arrival at the Death Star.
15 minutes, sir. We're getting clearance to enter the outer defensive zones now.
Carry on. Lord Vader?
Yes, Captain.
We're right on schedule, Lord Vader.
Excellent.
Lord Vader.
Well, Commander.
We have the prisoner outside, sir. What are your orders?
Escort her in, Commander.
Yes, sir. The prisoner will step forward.
Commander, you needn't be so curt with my guest.
Guest? I'm warning you,
Commander, you and your men may post yourselves by the hatch.
Yes, sir.
And that will be all for now, Captain.
As you wish, Lord Vader.
You've overstepped yourself, Vader. Firing on my ship and taking me captive. The Imperial Senate will not
No
take this...
longer presents any obstacle to me. You'd do better to worry about your own well-being, Princess Leia.
You won't succeed, you know. You will never be able to crush the rebellion.
I didn't have you brought here to listen to more of your pointless ranting, Your Highness. You're so upset that you haven't taken time to glance out of the main viewport at our destination.
The Death Star.
Quite right. Closer to completion than even your rebel agents estimated. I thought the sight of it might shock you into revealing that you knew of its existence.
I'd heard vague rumors in the Imperial Senate, nothing more. You've proved nothing, Vader.
You knew of the Death Star. You also intercepted the rebel message transmitting the technical design data for it. I'm offering you one last chance to tell me what you did with those plans. Once we've docked in that battle station, much harsher and more direct means will be used to question you.
You wouldn't dare. You'll never get away with this.
You think not? Look, Princess. Gaze upon the Death Star, the mightiest war machine that humankind has ever produced.
Welcome, Masters and Padawans, to episode 607 of Full of Sith. We've got an interesting interview from the archives today. This was done over 10 years ago. This was part of a series I did for Star Wars Insider magazine, where I was doing a really in-depth look at the NPR radio dramas. And this is an interview with Tom Voegeli. Tom had been the post-production supervisor and producer, and for the Return of the Jedi adaptation, the co-director, and he went on to do a number of other adaptations of like Crimson Empire and Dark Empire and things like that in the audio realm for Star Wars. But the NPR radio dramas are really this high watermark of interesting audio adaptation for Star Wars, and Tom had such great stories to tell. And unfortunately, you know, even though I had a multi-part piece in Star Wars Insider to tell some of these stories, you know, getting to talk to him for as long as I did, I only got to use one or two of them. And, you know, with NPR sort of getting defunded, I thought it would be a great time to sort of revisit this and remind folks who love Star Wars that this is the kind of really cool stuff that NPR does on top of their really great reporting and very neutral, objective reporting. Just to remind people, hey, if you've got extra money since they've been cut off from funding, I mean, in this day and age, everybody's been cut off from funding from the federal government here in the United States. But, you know, if you donate to NPR, you know, donate a little extra just in honor of the Star Wars NPR radio dramas. But without further ado, here is Tom Voegeli. And here he is talking to me about his experience with the Star Wars radio dramas.
Okay. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me about this. I'm sure. You love getting calls about stuff you did years and years and years ago.
25 years ago, yeah, exactly.
Could I start? Could you spell your name for me so I've got it on here and have it right.
Sure.
And
Tom Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Tom, as in Tom, Voegeli, V as in Victory, Oegeli.
And you were one of the producers on the Star Wars NPR.
Yeah, I was the sound designer, mixer on all three. I was the producer on the third, and sort of half producer on the first two. I mean, I was a producer. The third one, I was the producer.
So, could you tell me how your involvement came about on it in the first place?
Well, yeah. How did we get? I mean, there had been an attempt before we did the first 13 episodes, called Star Wars at the time, because that's all there was. Been an attempt by the BBC to do something, and they had proposed some scripts to Lucasfilm that Lucasfilm didn't like at all, so because they took too much liberty with the material. Mm-hmm. So Lucasfilm, George Lucas had given the rights to do these radio adaptations to KUSC in Los Angeles as a USC graduate. So KUSC KUSC then brought in National Public Radio, and National Public Radio was very interested in doing it. And so National Public Radio sort of put together the team, and that's how we started going. And Lucasfilm suggested the writer, a guy named Brian Daly, who was kind of in their stable. He'd been doing writing for them, and he did a lot of writing of, at some point later on, Lucasfilm sort of let the material after the third of the first trilogy, let it go to other people to be inventive with. And so Brian was one of those people too. But that was later on in the story. So Brian came in. I got a fellow named John Madden, who's a distinguished film director now, Shakespeare Love, and most recently Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. Really good friend of mine. We had actually done radio drama together, John and I. That's a whole nother story that we were doing radio drama. But we were, and so John, who was doing film at the time, came back to this country to direct the radio. So he was the director, I was the producer guy, and the sound guy, the sound mixing guy.
What connections did you have to Star Wars before working on it? I mean, presumably you saw the movie when it came out.
I didn't right away.
Really?
I remember. Frankly, it had such an incredible buzz, which is dangerous if you don't see the movie right away, because then if you see it like a month later, it never lives up to its buzz. And I remember liking it, but I wasn't blown away by Star Wars. Mm-hmm. I had no real connection to it before the radio adaptations were done.
How did that change for you personally after the radio adaptations? I mean, you really got to get in there and kind of see the work that had been done, especially with the audio and the special effects and whatnot.
The audio was really fun. This was earlier, when we did the first one, all the sound effects were on reel-to-reel tape, and I would go before each of the first two. I would go to visit Ben Burt, who was the sound designer, for those films, and sit there and copy various cues, various audio cuts onto another reel-to-reel, and then I would get them home. So I became close to the audio guys. And as a matter of fact, I was offered, maybe I should have taken the gig, but when I was in the middle of doing the third production, they called me, and they had just moved into a new mixing theater, and they asked me if I wanted to come and be a mixer on. Oh no, this was when I was doing Empire Strikes Back. We were doing Empire Strikes Back. Revenge of the Jedi had turned into Return of the Jedi, and they were mixing it, and they asked me if I wanted to come out and mix the dialogue for it. So I knew those guys really well. I declined, partially because I was in the middle of doing Empire Strikes Back at the time for radio. But I look back and think, what were you thinking? This was your big break in feature films. But I didn't take them up on it. But
and you've been no slouch in radio.
Pardon? Yeah, well, I've done well in radio, so I'm not really regretting it. Then by the time we did the last, what did we have in the third batch? We did 13 episodes, 10 episodes, and then 6, I think. I may be wrong in that, but Return of the Jedi was just 6 episodes. In part because it was a natural to finish the story, of the trilogy, and National Public Radio wasn't interested in anymore, and so that's where Highbridge Audio kind of came to the rescue and came up with enough money to finish it, and we got together and decided how many episodes it would take to tell the story, kind of at the same density of the first 2 movies, but shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Because 13 was probably too many episodes for the first one. 13 is sort of an old-fashioned broadcasting notion of it's a quarter of broadcasting. So it's back, in the olden days, a lot of things were done in 13 parts. So, but by the time we got to Return of the Jedi, it was, I think, am I in error? I don't know, but I think there's 6 episodes.
It's interesting that you say that, though, because, I've listened to them a couple of times pretty recently, and I think the one that stands up the best and kind of is the most outstanding is the first one with the Lang. Because it dives into things that are like consequential outside of the movies, so it's offering something new.
Right. That's true.
And in the length is really the only place you can do that.
Right. Well, there are other examples, and the one I like to point out is a scene that doesn't exist in Empire Strikes Back, and it's when Han has ridden out on a Tauntaun to rescue Luke, and you see in the film, cuts the Tauntaun open with his lightsaber and sticks Luke into the goop to warm him up. There's a scene in the radio production that takes place in sort of a bivouac tent where they spend the night waiting to get rescued. And I point that out for 2 reasons. First of all, it's a scene that doesn't exist in the film, but secondly, it's a scene that works really, really well on radio. So radio works best in the most intimate scenes. The perfect radio perspective is internal dialogue. But a scene with just 2 people is more effective on radio than where radio isn't as good is in action, right? The battle scenes and stuff. In part because you just can't cut around the way you can in film. The listener has to know where the microphone is, where the perspective is. So a lot of those battle scenes, they sort of cut from a cockpit perspective, right, to the command center perspective and back again. But they don't cut back and forth quickly because you couldn't follow that, because you don't have the visual clues to cut that much. So, but that scene where they're bivouacking on Hoth, I think is a really nice scene for both reasons. It doesn't exist in the film, but it's very effective on radio.
As someone who was engineering this, I think going back a little bit even further in Empire, I think one of the most striking scenes, which would have been almost entirely your purview, would be the attack of the rebels escaping. I think it's the very first scene in the Empire adaptation, and that's striking for all the reasons the tent scene isn't. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that scene in particular, because I think talking to a lot of people who've listened to them recently, that was one of the scenes that kind of hit everybody between the eyes.
That they liked, you mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, remind me, doesn't that take place, part of it is in one of the walkers? Doesn't it take place in the cockpit of the walker?
No, it was sort of in a radio. It was like a distress call of the Empire destroying these fleeing rebels before the scene gets to Hoth.
Oh, God, I'd have to go back and listen to it.
Okay.
You're honest to God, I haven't heard that for 25 years, and I don't remember that very well, to be honest with you. Brian, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. There's plenty of work in there for you to go back and be proud of if you ever revisit.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was proudest of Empire Strikes Back in production terms. I think it was the best casting. We recorded Star Wars was recorded in Los Angeles. Empire Strikes Back was recorded in New York, and then the final 6 episodes of Return of the Jedi were recorded back in L.A. I thought the New York casting was the best. We produced that on a digital multi-track machine, which was great, and that it allowed me lots more layers of sound effects without getting into all kinds of tape hiss and stuff. Just to me, that was the best production work. Were those episodes? But
how working with Brian Daley? Obviously, he's working with Lucasfilm, working on writing and things like that. And listening to the audio dramas, he has a very almost natural knack. It seems a natural knack for picking the scenes to do for radio and how to break up the story. And I'm wondering if you could talk about working with him, how that worked, if there was any give and take to that, or
well,
how
there
that
was. I mean, there was. He was very obviously Lucasfilm supervised or had to approve of everything, so they were very much involved. But Brian kind of proposed, the breakdown of the scripts, what would happen in each episode, what would be additional, and then John and I responded to that. Actually, probably more John than I, because John was in his earlier years, was a very experienced script editor at the BBC. So there was a fair amount of back and forth, but Brian was pretty much on target. Lucasfilm liked his work. The liberties that he took and the additional scenes that he proposed, basically pleased them. There were a couple of scenes that they didn't want to have in, but mostly, whatever liberties he took were so much within the Star Wars Bible that that he was able to do it. The places where he needed help, again, it's the action stuff, and it's the classic worst line in audio drama is, "This gun in my left hand is loaded," right?
Yeah.
So those kinds of how you work through those kinds of problems where you're not seeing what's going on, you need a little help with, but mostly that was John actually working with him after he proposed what the episodes would be, then and did a rough draft of the script. Then most of the back and forth was between John as the director and Brian.
What would you think if you had to pinpoint through the 3 films what the most challenging sequence to get to play correctly was? You've got a pretty big action sequence in every one of the adaptations. What was the one that you found was the hardest to nail?
Actually, it was the hardest to nail, and I think extremely successful in radio, but reworking all the effects and whatever. It's when the X-Wing sinks into the swamp on Dagobah, and it's not really an action scene. But that was very difficult to work out. I mean, one of the things I was really proud of was the use of music. Obviously, most of the music comes from the scores, the film scores. We did you'll hear a few cues that are like winds only, which, I had sort of had this notion that they're just some cues that the strings didn't play on, strings and brass. So you'll hear we recorded a few additional music cues, but re-editing that music and using it against, obviously completely different time frames, because things are, A, taking a lot longer on radio, and B, some of the things that are going on didn't happen in the film. And that was just a use of music. A lot of it is from that scene in the film, but that was a scene that was hard to pull off, and I think one of the more successful scenes in the whole set of radio adaptations.
As far as recording, can you kind of set the scene for me? What the recording looked like? You hear radio drama, you think of 10 actors in a room and a director and a sound engineer. Is that how it was? Is that how it played out?
Yeah, pretty much. We did all the dialogue without any sound effects first. So the actors were in the studio. Because of where we'd begun with our radio drama, we did a different technique than like, if you walked into any studio in LA and they were set up for recording dialogue, it would either be ADR for films or it would be, voices for animation where everyone is on a separate microphone. We did a lot of the scenes on a stereo microphone, so the actors were blocked. You come in off mic left and move on mic right, crossing the center of the stereo spectrum. We did have mics set up in isolation booths for a couple of things, for like Darth Vader, Brock Peters, who is going to have an effect put on him afterwards, and you don't want that. You want that effect controlled. C-3PO, Anthony Daniels, those guys were all recorded in isolation booths with the same actors, with the actors in the scene, on the other side of the glass. But they were recorded there, and we I think we did all this ancient technology now, but we did all the dialogue recording, at least for the first two on 4-track analog tape. So typically the stereo mic would be, recorded on 2 of those tracks, and then 2 isolation mics were available on the other 2 tracks. The only place where we would break that down, if it was an outdoor scene, we would, way to pull that off in the studio is to tight mic them and put everybody on a different mic, but you have to record everybody in isolation from each other, because obviously you're going to hear huge studio bleed through with someone, yelling, "Hey, Luke!" right?
Yeah.
Off 30 feet in the studio. So we would record, "Hey, Luke," really tight mic'd. And then even if it was a fade on, it's like Uncle Owen coming on to Luke from a distance, that would be done by recording it all tight mic and then fading it up. That's how we would do that. So I'm probably giving you more than you want.
No, it's all fascinating. It's all very fascinating. I mean, as you're working on this, was there ever a sense like, did anyone ever stop and say, "Listen, they've got the movies. Why exactly are we doing this?" And would you expect them to be so enduring that they're still selling well?
Well, no. And of course, remember, Brian, at the time that the first 2 were done, there wasn't anything like audio publishing. Well, there certainly wasn't the internet to go, to go download podcasts of the episodes or whatever, and there was no audio publishing. So the first 2 series were really seen as a radio series that might get played a couple times, but that would be the end of it. It wasn't until, books on tape and audio publishing became a viable thing, and Highbridge negotiated the rights for the first 2 sets of episodes and did really, really well with them, that they were able to come up with the money for the third. So I don't think there was any expectation that they'd be around this long. And what was the first part of your question?
Well, no, just did anyone ever stop and say, did anyone ever stop you and say, like, listen, they've got the movies. What do they need this? What do they need this for?
Well, we didn't, because John and I had, as I said, this is such ancient history, but we had worked together doing radio drama, and we believed very much in radio drama, and we had done radio dramas that had, been plays written by some of America's greatest playwrights, David Mamet and Arthur Kopit, and we actually won the Prix Italia with a play written by Arthur Kopit called Wings, which then later on went on to Broadway, that John directed on Broadway, and I did the sound design on Broadway. So we were very committed to be able to demonstrate that radio could do a great job of these adaptations, to be able to play with this material as radio drama, was probably so exciting that we never stopped to think, well, what's the future of this, or why are we doing it? It was just seen as, and obviously George Lucas had enough affection for radio to let it happen, which is probably fairly amazing that he did. So I think that was it. The other thing that has to be pointed out, which is one of the hallmarks of those episodes, there's no narration. There's the opening narration setting the scene, right, over the main title music. But it doesn't go to somebody, the way to deal with really difficult scenes would be to go to a narrator, right? So then Luke escaped from,
Yeah, but at that point, it's one of the children's books.
Yeah, or whatever. Well, you can use narration in radio drama just the same way you can use it in film, of course. In a very serious film, there's narration sometimes. But it was kind of the goal to do these as fully dramatized episodes and not have a narrator, sort of getting through the tough parts. So that's something that's kind of impressive.
Well, personally, I'm very grateful for them. They were playing on my local NPR station when I was probably they were re-airing them probably just after the Return of the Jedi one came out, and I was in probably a freshman in high school, and it was what actually set me on to NPR for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so, I'm personally grateful because, you're flipping through the dial and it's like, oh, there's Star Wars. What's this? Oh, there's all of NPR here also.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So Star Wars is obviously, by the time you were working on the first one, the first two films were out by now, yes?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they're iconic. They've taken over the pop culture. Right. Was there ever any anxiety on the part of the production that maybe they wouldn't live up to something that would add themselves to the zeitgeist of the time?
I think the only concern was that since the cast was not identical, would that be too disappointing? To hear Harrison Ford's part, acted by Perry King. You had obviously a couple of key members of the original cast. Brock Peters was a damn good Darth Vader.
Yeah. Well, and I think Perry King, I think, knocked it out of the park. I mean, he made it his own. And for me, it's really interesting to hear a different take on a character everybody knows. Right. But that I think was the only concern, that people would be, we only had Mark Hamill and Anthony Daniels and Billy D. Williams in the second film. Would that be disappointing? Other than that, I don't think we worried about it. Again, it was such a cool opportunity. I mean, you're right. It's hard to even go back to how absolutely a part of mass pop culture those films were, and to be able to play in that sandbox and do pure audio productions. It's interesting. I went on after Star Wars was when the Raiders of the Lost Ark film came out, and the Indiana Jones series. And Lucasfilm hired me to do, this is a very obscure. I love the obscure. It actually won a Grammy Award. And it was called Raiders of the Lost. This is still back in the days of, Brian, you won't remember, 12-inch LPs, although they're coming back, as you know.
and it was called Raiders of the Lost Ark: The Story on Record. And what they wanted me to do was to tell the story of Raiders of the Ark in only sound effects, whatever dialogue existed, and there was precious little dialogue in that film, and music. And understanding that in some cases it would have to be impressionistic, you wouldn't be able to follow it. So then it came with a story, like 20 color photos of the story, you know, sort of guiding you through if you couldn't figure it out in audio terms. And it, you know, that was great fun too. My God, that was a very successful film. And then to be able to take that and try to do it in audio terms again without narration, it was just. And I remember sitting out at what was called the Egg Factory then, which was where the original audio department was before the ranch was created. It was in San Rafael, and called the Egg Factory so no one would know what the hell was going on inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And going through, I literally went through all of the dialogue, the dialogue recording from the set to try to see if there was anything recorded that wasn't in the film.
So I'm going to have to track this down. I'm really, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is an amazing film, and it's got such incredible oral quality. And I'm really
well, you know what?
Now.
If you can't search it out, but if you can't find it, I probably have 2 or 3 copies of it left, and I'd be happy to give one to you because it's like, what else am I going to do with them? You know, if you'd enjoy hearing it, I mean, look for it. It might be readily available. I doubt it, but if it isn't, just give me a call back or email me back, and I'll be happy to send you one.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're going to have a turntable. You know,
oh, I've got one. I listen to records all the time.
Okay.
I've had a collection since I was, a kid, and I've always had a turntable in the house. So
cool. Well, that's great. It's great.
So with Ben Burtt, right? I mean, Ben Burtt, the guy just kind of came out of left field and created sound and films like we'd never really heard before. And here you are sort of building on his work. I'm curious if there's anything that you can say like Ben Burtt taught you and you've carried forward in the work you've done elsewhere.
Well, I think the biggest one is he believed strongly, and this really affected sound design for a long time, and it has affected my work, although I haven't done really much. The only radio drama I've done after Star Wars was like sketch drama in other shows I do or something that uses radio drama, but in a short form. But I think the big one was the belief that the sound should all have natural origins. So instead of back then, the absolutely typical horrible synthesized laser from a synthesizer, ting, ting, he blended the sounds of a guy wire being hit and other sounds to make those. He believed that all the sounds in the Star Wars universe, at least in the generation where I worked on it and I knew him, quite well, they all came from the real world. They were manipulated. They were slowed down and sped up and layered and all kinds of things, but they all came from the real world. And that was a huge, no one had ever done that, conceived of that. I mean, obviously all the sounds in the 1930s film came from the real world, but, that was all you had. So I think that was the big thing he did. I will tell the story because, so the first film, I go out and I land on his doorstep and with his 2 assistants at the Egg Factory. And they have it's not that big or impressive a facility. They have a nice control room that they work in. And then on the wall are all real tapes of, and when they would work up an effect, obviously they'd store it there and then they'd move it to, back in the old film technology, they'd dub it across to magnetic film stock, and then edit and then take it into the mixing theater that way. But I went out and I had complete access to his, incredible work. And I'm sitting there copying it. And we go out to dinner one night and whatever. And I remember part of my job I felt was to convince him, A, that the effects would never leave my hands. You know, I actually put them all in. I put all the tapes I brought back in a suitcase and bought a seat for it on the plane. Like, you know, cellists do that. They, you know, they put their cello in a seat and strap it in. Well, that's what I did with all those things. And I promised I would never, ever, they would only be in my hands. I would never copy them. I would never, which I never, ever did. You know, later on, I had the whole set of effects on one of the worst technologies ever made in audio, which was the DAT tape, PAT digital audio tape. And, you know, when I eventually, you know, got rid of those thinking, you know, I didn't even want to have them. I destroyed them physically so that they couldn't be copied. So I kept my word for him. But I remember thinking, because Ben has had nothing to do with this deal about NPR doing these radio dramas, right? He gets a memo. He gets a memo from somebody saying, this guy, Tom Voegeli, however you pronounce his last name, is going to show up on Monday, and you have to let him copy all these effects. I mean, he must have been, in some ways, mortified by that, you know. But he was you know, incredibly nice about it, incredibly nice guy. But I did spend some time just saying, you know, absolutely promising him personally, forget about what's in a contract, you know, of what was to be done with the effect. Personally, as a guy who very, very, very much admired his work, you know, I wasn't going to let him down and wasn't going to let other people, you know, he wasn't going to find versions of these effects on other sound effects libraries, you know, in America or whatever. So,
yeah. Do you think if Lucasfilm called you up and said, hey, we're getting the band back together, we're going to redo episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to start in on 7 as radio dramas, would that even be outside the realm of possibility for you and, you know, people involved to say yes?
Well, I'd do it in a minute, basically, frankly, to be honest with you. I think John, you know, might, if I begged him for old times. I mean, his career has done so well since Star Wars that he wouldn't need to do it. But, you know, the thing about radio drama, Brian, one thing, it's just so fun to do. You know, from an acting point of view, you don't have to memorize your lines, right? You have to. There are a couple skills you need as an actor to do good radio drama. You have to be able to turn your pages without making any noise. That's one. But you have to. There are a few tricks. One. I'll just give you one example. Intensity, not volume. In other words, you don't shout at the mic when you're shouting. There's a way to pitch your voice. So, Brian, you know, instead of screaming at you. That's much more effective. There are various techniques. There's a thing of holding yourself in the scene. So even if you don't have a line written, you know, you're laying in, you know, little transactional things that keep you present in the scene. But other than that, you know, this is why when radio drama was king at the BBC, at Radio 3, you know, Gielgud, everybody acted for radio because they would come in, they liked the play, they'd come in, they'd read through it at a table, and then they'd record it, and they'd go home. And it's just such great fun because it's easy on the actor. It's you know, very jovial in the studio usually, you know, and so yeah, I'd do it in a minute. And I imagine John would at least have to consider it if asked, but I doubt he'd do it, but he certainly might. I mean, his career had really taken off by the time we did the Return of the Jedi. And he came back somewhat out of obligation, somewhat for me, because it was great work for me, and somewhat out of, and it wasn't going to take that much of his time. It was going to take like 7 days of his time. I think we did an episode a day, basically, is how we recorded him. So.
Speaking of him, and Frank at Highbridge said that I should ask you about it. I've been kind of scrambling, going from person to person, trying to get a hold of him, and he said you might have some way to get a hold of him, or at least let him know that somebody's trying to.
Yeah, I can let him know. I don't want to give you his details because
I understand that completely.
But I would be happy. As a matter of fact, I'm flying to London tomorrow to be with him. So we're going to hang for a week. I'm going to his daughter's wedding, and then we're going up to a country house he has for 4 or 5 days. So I'd be happy to say, you know, here's this guy. He's a great guy. He's writing about the old radio dramas. You know, email him if you'd be willing to talk to him. I would be.
I would appreciate that. It's been, I mean, like you said, I mean, he's just through the stratosphere compared to where he was, I guess. And I've found some other interviews where people kind of corner him about it and talk to him about it. And, but that was about as, I imagine he might be sick of people hearing about it. I'm not sure. But
but now it's almost antiquity for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember those fun days we had? You know, would you spend 20 minutes, half an hour talking to this guy? So I have no problem. I know I have your details, but would you mind sending me, just so I have it on my phone, a new email with, with your email and your phone number?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't even have to write it, just so I have it with me on my iPhone, because I'm not going back to my computer. So. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's actually for StarWars.com, for the website, one of the columns I write is the cinema influences of Star Wars, and most of the time it's, Hidden Fortress and things like that. But a piece I turned in for about 2 months from now, because they need all this lead time to translate them and stuff. I actually did Shakespeare in Love as sort of here was John Madden, and Shakespeare in Love is probably one of my favorite movies ever, and to get a chance to write about it for Star Wars, and that George Lucas Love short and things like that, and my goal is cool. My goal is to use Star Wars to turn people onto other films also, and Shakespeare in Love is one of those I think everybody needs to get turned on to. Yeah, well, great. That's very cool. I think he'd be willing to talk to you. I mean, he's an extremely nice guy. I'm not paying him to be, No, not at all. But I understand. It's better if I ask him, and then he can reach out to you. Then, I do not. I understand that completely, and if he gets a hold of me, I'll be elated. And if not, you've been more than generous with your time and information, and I think I've got plenty to start a great piece here. Well, if you need anything else, I have an additional question. Shoot it my way. I'll be. He's certainly not incommunicado in England, but I'll be. Sort of low mode for a week. Well, I hope I'm not even going to be that busy. I hope I'm going to be, in museums and whatever. Yeah. And then I count that as busy. Yeah. It can be busy. Yeah. Even museums can be a lot of work, actually. I have sort of the hour and a half rule. I can take art for about an hour and a half. When I was in Paris last, I went to the Louvre for the first time, and I was like, I'm gonna take in the Louvre, and there's so much to see here. Why would I want to go here for more than a day? And I was there for 12 hours, and I'm still not sure. I saw everything, and after hour 2, I'm not sure I know what I saw. Yeah, well, good for you. You undoubtedly saw the 4,000 people around the Mona Lisa, so no one could actually see it. Actually, that was the first thing I went and did, so there was only about 20 people around it when I went to go see it. Good for you. Okay. So, the other thing, when I was last in Paris, which was a couple of years ago, at the Musée d'Orsay, the Impressionist collection there. Yeah. And people were literally, French are very relaxed, or at least they were 3 years ago still, about photography. And people were going around with their smartphones. They weren't even looking at the paintings. They were taking photos of the paintings so they could show their friends that they saw these. It's like, that's crazy to me. What are you doing? Look at the art. It's crazy. No,
it's one of those things where you just don't know what you're going to be bowled over when you're there, and because I can look at all of these on a with a 4-second Google search.
Right.
So if I'm just going to take a picture, what's the point?
What's the point? Yeah.
Anyway. Like I said, I've taken up so much of your time. Thank you very much for talking to me. This has been very enlightening, and the work that you did all those years ago is still people still really love it. So
it's great. Well, great talking to you. And again, if you want a follow-up question or whatever, I'm certainly happy to do it. So
okay, I will.
Right.
I thank you very much.
All right, great to talk to you, Bryan.
Yeah, I still can't even imagine like walking into Ben Burtt's office and not even like feeling like no one had told him, and then having to just take all of those originals of the Star Wars tapes, and that seems terrifying for both of them. Just lots of good stories in there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We should be back with a regular episode next week, and hopefully Holly has an update from HalseyCon, which she was at this week, or this last weekend. So, for me, I've got a book coming out this weekend. It's called Outfoxed. It's a new BattleTech novel, so you can get signed copies at swankmatron.com, or you can get it wherever it is you get books. So just look up BattleTech Outfoxed and check that out, or check out Swankmatron, or check me out wherever you find me on social media at Swankmatron. For Full of Sith, you can go to fullofsith.com, check out any of the back catalog of episodes, and send us an email at holocron@fullofsith.com. We'd love to hear from you. And be sure to rate and review the show wherever it is you listen to it. And I think that might be it. So for super producer Mike Pilot, and for the galactic star cruising, reminiscing Holly Fry, I'm Bryan Young, and the Force will be with you always.
Sir, if you'll not be meeting me, I'll close down for a while.